July 1945. The Pacific War is nearing its end and a small US Marine unit vanishes without a trace. No distress calls, no survivors, no explanations. Lieutenant David Mercer, a decorated officer, steady under fire, a man entrusted with secrets, disappears with his recon team on Hoshizaki Island, leaving behind a hidden camp, cryptic journal entries, and questions that would remain unanswered for decades. It was late summer. They were known as Recon Company D, led by Lieutenant David Mercer. Their mission to establish a forward radar outpost on a small volcanic island once called Hoshizaki. It was meant to be a simple assignment: secure the ground, set up communications, await pickup. But what followed became one of the most perplexing disappearances in American military history. In early August, just weeks before the official surrender, all radio contact with Camp Mercer abruptly stopped. Their final transmission was drowned in static. A few broken words about worsening weather and unidentified movement along the ridge. Before the line went dead, the Navy dispatched reconnaissance aircraft, but there was no sign of life, no fires, no debris, no signal. Days later, a massive typhoon, one of the most violent in decades, ripped through the Minami Islands, obliterating everything in its path. When the skies finally cleared, Hoshizaki Island had vanished from maps. Its name was erased, replaced only by a string of cold military grid numbers. Decades later, when a research vessel detected a faint radio signal buried beneath the sea floor, one matching Recon Company D's frequency, the mystery of Hoshizaki resurfaced. What really happened to the men of Camp Mercer before the storm hit? Most people will scroll away and forget this ever happened. But not you. You have stayed. So please subscribe, because some mind-blowing stories are coming your way. Officially, the Marines of Recon Company D were listed as missing in action. Unofficially, they were forgotten. For years, their families received little more than templated letters, polite condolences from offices that had long since lost record of the mission itself. But history has a way of clawing its way back. Decades later, during a vegetation survey, a research drone captured something beneath Hoshizaki's dense canopy. A faint metallic outline, geometric, unmistakably man-made. It was a pattern the jungle could never have formed on its own. That single image would reopen a file sealed since the Truman era, and reignite a question the military had quietly buried: what really happened to the men of Camp Mercer? From the air, Hoshizaki appears insignificant, a dark green blemish adrift in turquoise waters. But beneath that living shroud lies a maze of ruin and silence. The island measures only a few miles across, yet its heart is almost impenetrable. The jungle grows in layers, banyan roots twisting like cables, ferns rising above a man's height, and vines that constrict and consume anything daring enough to move within. And somewhere within that overgrowth, the metallic shape the drone captured seemed to echo the same coordinates erased from maps in 1945. What the drone's footage revealed next would challenge everything historians believed about Hoshizaki's disappearance. The locals still call it Kaminari Shima, the Island of Thunder. They claim the storms there never sleep, that the rain falls even beneath a cloudless sky. Fishermen avoid its shores, and the few who have landed tell uneasy stories, lights drifting through the jungle at night, moving against the wind like restless lanterns. After the war, Japanese surveyors stayed clear of Hoshizaki altogether. Their reports described failing instruments, distorted radio signals, and one line, later blacked out, that mentioned voices near the southern ridge. Over the years, the island slipped into legend, part cautionary tale, part classified mystery. Then, decades later, the drone footage surfaced. At first, researchers thought the metallic glint under the trees was just debris from the war. But as they enhanced the frames, the shapes began to align: clean geometric angles, trench outlines, and the curved roof of what looked unmistakably like a Quonset hut, the kind once used by US Marines. The island, it seemed, hadn't buried its past. Beneath decades of vegetation, something built by human hands was still there, waiting. By 1945, the war was staggering toward its end, though the men on the ground didn't know it yet. Under the codename Operation Ghost Reef, the US Pacific Command authorized one final covert deployment, a contingency in case the mainland invasion became unavoidable. The objective sounded simple enough: send a small marine recon team to a volcanic island south of Miyagi, establish a radar and refueling outpost, and maintain absolute radio silence until new orders came through. Lieutenant Jack Hennan, a battle-tested veteran of Tarawa and Peleliu, was chosen to lead the mission. Calm under fire, disciplined to the bone, he commanded the Marines, 3 combat engineers, and a single Navy radioman. Each man had been hand-picked for endurance and secrecy. Hoshizaki had no docks, no villages, no human presence at all, just cliffs, choking jungle, and the endless drone of cicadas. Supplies arrived by seaplanes every few days, weather permitting. They built their camp on the island's northern edge, carving into the dense foliage to raise aluminum Quonset huts, radio towers, and rows of camouflaged fuel drums. They called it Camp Mercer. For a while, everything went according to plan. Patrols reported calm seas, stable ground, and no sign of enemy activity. But then came the anomalies. Faint radar echoes that flickered in and out of existence, shapes appearing for seconds before dissolving into static. The radioman blamed atmospheric interference. Others weren't so sure. At night, some claimed they saw flickers of light moving along the ridges, slow, deliberate, and far too high for fireflies. By dawn, Lieutenant Hennan ordered the remaining men to secure the ridge, unaware of what they were about to uncover in the mist. Thanks for watching so far. If you are comfortable, comment where are you watching from and what's the time over there. Thank you, and let's stay locked in. The monsoon came early that year. Supplies rotted in their crates. The humidity clung to everything, thick as smoke. Communication with Miyagi began to fail, first faint, then warped, until every message arrived drenched in static, like the storm itself was trying to drown their voices. In August, Pacific Command received one final transmission from Camp Mercer, camp secure, storm closing in. Then came the burst of white noise and silence. The report was logged as routine weather interference. It wasn't. Within hours, Operation Ghost Reef ceased to exist on paper. That night, a typhoon of almost mythical strength ripped through the Minami Islands. Winds exceeding empores tore the island apart, uprooting trees and bending steel like wire. Waves swallowed the coastlines, and radar stations across Miyagi blinked out one by one, their signals erased in a wash of electromagnetic fury. When the skies finally cleared, it looked as if the ocean had scrubbed the islands bare. Navy search teams scoured the waters for days, recovering only fragments, splintered wood, shredded fuel drums, a single lifeboat with no markings, drifting aimlessly in the current. Hoshizaki was unreachable. Coral reefs and violent swells guarded its approach, and every attempt to land was driven back. Weeks passed before a reconnaissance team finally touched down on the northern beach. What they found defied reason. There was no wreckage, no trace of machinery or human presence, no footprints, no tools, not even a rusted nail. The jungle stood eerily untouched, as if no one had ever been there, yet the sand told another story: deep grooves where none should exist, the kind left when the earth itself moves. The report from that 1945 landing was classified within hours. What the team wrote in its final line would never appear in any public archive. Years later, when a civilian expedition accidentally rediscovered Hoshizaki's coordinates, that same sentence would resurface, and with it, the island's silence would finally begin to break. The commanding officer's field report was brief, but unsettling. The island appears untouched, impossible given the storm's path. He was right. Something about Hoshizaki didn't behave like the rest of the world. Compasses spun aimlessly, radios cut to static, and one sailor swore he heard the clang of metal echoing from somewhere deep within the forest, though no one else heard a thing. After a week of empty searches, the Navy abandoned the recovery effort. The file was stamped unrecoverable. The men of Camp Mercer were declared missing in action. Their families received medals, condolences, and decades of silence. Soon after, Hoshizaki Island was erased from naval charts, its position replaced with a blank patch of ocean. Officially, it no longer existed. Unofficially, the jungle waited, patient, watchful, still holding what the storm could not take. For years afterward, The story of Camp Hennan survived only in whispers, an unverified tale passed between historians, divers and the families who never stopped asking questions. There were no autopsy reports, no confirmed deaths, no graves, just names etched on a memorial wall at Quantico and a few sun-bleached photographs of men squinting into the Pacific light. The mission itself had been erased, its record sealed, its designation struck from every surviving document. What the analysts found embedded in that file's metadata would suggest that Operation Ghost Reef hadn't ended in 1945 at all. Because before the island vanished, Lieutenant Hennan had sent one last message, one that never reached Pacific Command. You've followed Mercer this far, don't stop now. Most people scroll past stories like this and forget, but not you. You felt something, don't just watch. Subscribe before the next secret disappears. A retired naval archivist named Daniel Pierce uncovered a forgotten file buried deep within the Pacific Command archives. The label read Ghost Reef Restricted Command Eyes Only. Inside were fragments of encrypted messages, requisition forms for prototype radar components, and a handwritten note stamped denied existence. It didn't take long for Pierce to realize the truth. Operation Ghost Reef had been buried so deeply that even the Navy itself had disowned it. Pierce went public releasing copies of what he'd found to a small circle of journalists and military historians. But within days, federal agents confiscated the materials under the National Security Act, citing classified wartime intelligence. Pierce was never charged, but he died the following year in what reports described as a single-vehicle accident on an unlit coastal road. Meanwhile, the families of Camp Hennan's men were trapped in an endless maze of contradictions. One widow received a letter stating her husband had died heroically at sea. Another was told his death occurred in combat, location Miyagi Prefecture. Others were given vague classifications like non-operational casualty or unrecoverable. No two reports aligned. Each inquiry only deepened the confusion, until by the 1960s, most families had stopped asking altogether. The war had ended, the heroes were mourned, and the truth was quietly locked away. Yet traces of something deeper remained. In one internal memo, a commander had written in the margins recommend full suppression, sight compromised, unnatural interference. Another referenced post-event anomalies and magnetic corruption. The language was clinical, yet beneath it there was fear. It was as if those writing the reports couldn't find the words for what they had seen. For nearly 50 years, Hoshizaki Island stayed invisible, absent from tourist maps, omitted from maritime charts, sealed off by layers of bureaucratic red tape that no one dared to question. That revelation would lead researchers back to the last known coordinates of Camp Mercer, and to the place where the jungle first began to move again. They say David Mercer vanished because he ignored the signs, the silence, the feeling of being watched, the instinct that something was wrong. Most people do the same until it's too late. Don't wait to be the next mystery. Learn how to stay alert, grounded and alive wherever you are. Get your survival guide in the pinned comment below. The world had moved on from the men of Camp Mercer. Their names lingered only on memorials, but the jungle didn't forget. And one day it would speak. Years passed, the story should have ended, but sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. It waits. A team of ecologists from Osaka University set out to survey remote islands in the Ryukyu chain as part of a post-typhoon reforestation project. One island, listed only as Sector B, was barely visible on satellite maps. A tiny green smudge in a turquoise sea. The team deployed drones to record tree density and soil moisture, expecting routine data. Instead, the sensors began picking up strange thermal readings, angular shapes, too precise to be natural. When the images were stitched together, the shapes revealed a pattern. 6 rectangles, evenly spaced, buried beneath centuries of banyan roots and volcanic soil. Man-made, one technician murmured. The files were sent back to Osaka for deeper analysis. That's when the anomalies multiplied. The metal beneath the jungle carried a faint magnetic charge, pulsing rhythmically as if frozen mid-current. The researchers initially assumed it was a storm-buried shipwreck, But the geometry didn't match anything maritime. Instead, it resembled foundations, structures, even shelters. Something deliberately built. The location matched the erased grid coordinates once assigned to Hoshizaki Island, where Camp Mercer had disappeared. As the team prepared a second drone flight to map the site in detail, their instruments began to fail, one by one, just as the magnetic pulse grew stronger. And deep beneath the roots, something in the metal seemed to be waiting. When the footage reached historian Hiroshi Yamamoto, he felt a chill run down his spine. The arrangement of the rectangles was unmistakable. It mirrored the standard layout of a U.S. Marine forward operating camp, identical dimensions, spacing, and pattern. Decades after Operation Ghost Reef had vanished from the records, the jungle was whispering its secret. The island the world had long forgotten was alive again, and whatever lay buried beneath its roots and ash was ready to be uncovered. You weren't supposed to hear this story, but now you have. Subscribe before they realize you know too much. At first, the discovery spread quietly. A handful of encrypted emails between Osaka and San Francisco, a few restricted academic notes. But when the U.S. Defense POWMIA accounting agency caught wind of the anomaly, the situation escalated rapidly. Within weeks, a joint U.S.-Japanese recovery mission was greenlit, officially framed as an ecological heritage survey. In reality, it was the first sanctioned exploration of Hoshizaki Island since 1945. The mission was led by Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a military anthropologist renowned for identifying forgotten Pacific battlefield sites. Calm, meticulous, unrelenting, Hayes had spent years reconstructing lost histories from fragments too small for most to notice. Alongside her was Hiroshi Yamamoto himself, an Miyagi University historian and one of the last living experts on Japan's wartime classified islands. Where Hayes brought method and evidence, Yamamoto brought stories, folklore passed down by fishermen who swore they had heard English voices drifting from Hoshizaki's jungle long after the war ended. It was the same ridge where Lieutenant Hennan's patrol had vanished, the same coordinates later picked up by drones decades afterward. The team reached Hoshizaki in early spring. Their landing craft cut through water thick with silt and scattered coral, the island rising ahead like a cathedral of green. Vines twisted around banyans, moss blanketed every surface, and the air felt heavy, almost alive. They set up a small base near the northern shore, close to where Camp Mercer had once stood. The ground underfoot was oddly soft in places, as if something hollow lingered beneath the soil. "This isn't just history," Hayes murmured, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. "It's a grave." For days, the team mapped the terrain using drones and ground-penetrating radar, scanning for hidden metal. Each night, the jungle seemed to breathe. The wind whispered through leaves, insects screeched like static, and branches cracked under unseen weight. Yamamoto meticulously recorded the sounds, noting that some patterns resembled Morse code. Hayes dismissed it outwardly, but both felt the same unease. The island wasn't just observed, it was watching them. On the fifth day, the radar revealed a void. A massive cavity appeared below the surface, outlined with metallic edges. The team excavated carefully, peeling back layer after layer of soil. Then came a dull, resonant thud. Hayes knelt, brushing the dirt away with a gloved hand. Beneath the earth lay a warped slab of corrugated steel, unmistakably constructed by humans. Faintly etched into the metal were the words U.S. Marine Corps, property of Camp Mercer. The air grew heavier as the excavation widened. Beneath the slab, a tunnel entrance emerged, collapsed on one side but open enough to crawl through. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Flashlights caught a ghostly glint. Rusted helmets lined the walls. Canteens fused to the rock, ration tins stamped 1945. Fragments of uniforms, bleached to dust, littered the floor. Then Hayes froze. A grenade wedged into the wall, its pin still intact, half swallowed by the earth. "Nobody move," she whispered. For a long, tense moment, the team held their breath. The ordnance specialist finally confirmed it was inert, its charge long corroded. Yet the weight of danger remained palpable. The deeper they ventured, the more the scene resembled a moment frozen in time. A camp caught mid-breath, abandoned in an instant. On a rusted bunk, a name tag peeked out Lieutenant J. Mercer. Nearby, a lantern sat untouched, its glass unbroken, as if waiting for someone to light it again. Every item lay perfectly preserved beneath layers of volcanic ash, a time capsule sealed by decades of silence. Hayes crouched beside the name tag, tracing the letters with a gloved hand. They didn't vanish, she murmured. They were buried alive. And in that shadowed, suffocating bunker, the long-held silence of Hoshizaki began to stir. It was Hiroshi who discovered it. Beneath a collapsed storage rack, tucked inside a rusted ammunition crate, lay something no one expected to survive decades of Hoshizaki's oppressive humidity. A small leather-bound notebook, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. The leather was cracked, the pages stiff but intact, and the ink had faded to a fragile brown whisper. On the inside cover, written in neat block letters, were the words Lieutenant J. Hennan, Camp Log, July to August 1945. Dr. Hayes read aloud, her voice catching as she turned the fragile pages. At first, the entries were mundane supply counts, weather observations, notes on radar calibration. But gradually the tone shifted. August 2nd, she read. Men reporting strange lights near the ridge after dark. Think it's phosphorescence or enemy scouts. Told them to keep quiet, maintain discipline. The following entry was shorter, the handwriting rougher, almost hurried lights again. Movement in the trees. No sound, no tracks. Thompson swears he heard English, but the accent's wrong. The team exchanged tense glances, knowing that the notebook might finally explain why Camp Mercer had never returned. By mid-August, Hennan's notes had shifted from routine observations to something far more personal. Words like fatigue and paranoia appeared repeatedly. Something's off. Radios cutting in and out. Compass unreliable. Private Turner refuses night watch, says he sees faces between the branches. Hayes turned to the final entries. The ink was smeared either by water or sweat, and the handwriting had become frantic, letters sprawling beyond the margins. The jungle isn't empty. We see lights at night, voices not ours, men disappearing, no signs of struggle, just gone. If we disappear, it won't be the storm that takes us. The room fell silent. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hold their breath. Hayes closed the journal slowly, her glove leaving a faint impression on the cover. Whatever had claimed the men of Camp Hennan, they had sensed it coming. And whatever they'd glimpsed before that final typhoon wasn't merely nature, it had been watching back. Back on the mainland, the journal's discovery sent shockwaves through both governments. The US issued a limited statement acknowledging the finding as historically significant, but behind closed doors, classified files were quietly being reopened. In Osaka, Hiroshi gained access to post-war archives previously sealed under military order. Among faded reports and handwritten notes, he uncovered a file labeled Imperial Intelligence Detachment, Hoshizaki Outpost, August 1945. The Japanese had maintained a small secret presence on the same island, entirely unknown to US forces. The report detailed 8 men dispatched to monitor unidentified Allied activity south of Miyagi. Their final entry ended abruptly, radio interference increasing. Possible detection by foreign unit. Awaiting extraction. None of them were ever seen again. The simultaneous disappearances of both US Marines and Japanese observers hinted at the same unseen force lurking on Hoshizaki, the same one the drones later detected decades afterward. And for the first time, Hayes realized the island wasn't just hiding history, it was actively defending it. As she and Yamamoto prepared to descend deeper into the network of tunnels, the forest outside seemed to grow quieter, as if holding its breath for what was about to emerge. Local oral histories added another layer to the mystery. Fishermen from the nearby Amami coast still spoke of a battle that never appeared in any record. A sudden clash deep in the jungle that left no bodies, no shell casings, no survivors. They called it the Night of the Whispers. Villagers described the jungle screaming that night, gunfire, flashes of lightning, then a silence so absolute it felt wrong. Almost deliberate. After the war, Japanese officials quietly removed Hoshizaki from territorial maps, citing geological instability. The truth was far stranger. They wanted the island forgotten. Yamamoto began piecing the fragments together, overlaying Japanese observation points with the Marines' camp layout. The positions aligned almost perfectly. Two forces, isolated and unaware of the other's full strength, had converged amid a storm so violent it had erased every trace of their presence. Yet even with the evidence, something remained unresolved. The remains found in the bunker were too few, too orderly. Hayes whispered, almost to herself, "If there was a battle here, where are the others?" The question lingered in the heavy, humid air. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and for a moment the island felt as if it were listening. The ridge where these disappearances occurred matched both the drone anomalies and Lieutenant Hennan's final journal entries, linking all threads across decades. If you think this story's over, you haven't been paying attention. Subscribe now while the forest is still quiet. 3 days after the journal surfaced, the excavation expanded beyond the bunker. The earth itself seemed reluctant to release its secrets. Roots tangled with rusted helmets. Banyan tendrils clutched shards of steel like fingers. When the first bone emerged, the team went silent. A femur, pale and bleached, entwined with a strip of rotted canvas. They expected to uncover American remains. What they did not anticipate were the insignia that followed. A corroded Japanese badge fused to the same rib cage. More bones appeared, arranged like a frozen tableau. 2 bodies, intertwined, one clad in tattered US uniform, the other in Japanese field gear. They weren't side by side but pressed together, as though locked in combat, or perhaps clutching each other in desperate solidarity. As the days wore on, the number of remains grew. Forensic specialists catalogued partial skeletons in total. Some were unmistakably American, others Japanese, and a few impossible to identify. The most confounding detail wasn't the mixed uniforms, it was the timeline. Carbon dating revealed that some bones had been buried decades after 1945, with a few as recent as the early 2000s. "That's not possible," Hayes whispered, staring at the data sheet. No retrieval missions, no recorded survivors. Yet the evidence was irrefutable. Someone had lived here long after the war, tending the dead, patching uniforms, perhaps even defending the site from something unrecorded. A rusted M1 rifle was discovered nearby, its barrel bent as though crushed by immense force. A Japanese canteen rested beside it, recently refilled enough to leave faint mineral traces. The scene suggested a chilling reality. Fragments of 2 armies had merged into one. Soldiers, cut off from the world, surviving together or dying together, in perfect silent isolation. The tunnel where these remains were found lay directly beneath the ridge described in Lieutenant Hennan's journal, linking the decades-old entries to the living evidence uncovered by the team. Yamamoto stood at the edge of the excavation pit as the sun sank behind the dense canopy, his voice barely audible. "Maybe they didn't stop fighting the war," he said. "Maybe the island made them fight something else." No one spoke. The wind shifted through the trees with a sound eerily like breathing. It was during the 7th week, near the remnants of the camp's command tent, that they uncovered the radio. Its metal frame was warped and partially melted, dials fused in place, but the serial number confirmed it as a U.S. Marine Field Station model from 1945. Inside, a fragment of the transmission coil had survived, shielded beneath layers of clay. Hayes insisted it be carefully transported to a lab in Yokohama for digital restoration. Weeks later, the reconstructed signal yielded something astonishing, a sound file less than seconds long. It began as static, dense, electric, almost alive. Then came a voice, calm but strained, filtered through decades of silence. "This isn't enemy fire." The static surged, masking the words like waves on rock. Then, faintly clearer, "It's something else. Tell them, the jungle moves." The final 3 words sent a shiver through everyone in the room. The experts replayed the recording endlessly, debating its meaning. Was it metaphorical? A warning of landslides or collapsing terrain? The delirium of isolation? Or had Mercer and his men truly witnessed something unexplainable? Environmental scientists speculated on the island's magnetized volcanic core, capable of visual illusions, disorientation, even infrasound hallucinations. Others whispered of biochemical or experimental interference. recalling the old classified memos that hinted at devices beyond comprehension. The words "the jungle moves" echoed the rhythmic pulses detected by the drones decades earlier, connecting Mercer's last message to the anomalies still present beneath Hoshizaki. "If this stays up, you'll want to be here when the next piece drops. Subscribe before it disappears." But to Yamamoto, the message carried a deeper resonance. He remembered a Miyagin legend of Thunderwood, the Thunder Forest, where trees were said to shift after storms to hide the spirits of the dead. "Maybe," he murmured, "the island wasn't trying to kill them. Maybe it was keeping them." Hayes said nothing. She simply played the tape again. The voice of a man long gone, whispering through decades of static, a warning from the edge of history. Outside, the jungle swayed as if listening. By the time the final fragments of evidence reached San Francisco, the official narrative had already been sanitized. Camp Mercer was labeled a classified wartime anomaly, its findings dismissed as inconclusive. But Hayes wasn't convinced. In the basement of the National Archives, she discovered a restricted series of files cross-referenced under Naval Signal Interference, 1945. Inside were requisition orders for prototype electromagnetic dispersal units, signed by senior officers from the same division that had deployed Lieutenant Mercer's team. Alongside them were chemical inventory lists marked Agent Echo, a code name for an experimental agent designed to scramble enemy radar by releasing ionized particles into the atmosphere. The compounds were untested, volatile, and rumored to cause hallucinations, skin corrosion, and severe psychological disorientation. Hayes realized with a chill that Mercer's unit had not been deployed simply to establish a radar post. They had been instruments themselves, human test subjects in an operation the Navy had never intended to acknowledge. The distortions described in Mercer's journal, the phantom voices, the magnetic anomalies, everything now aligned with the long-hidden experiment that had left the men trapped on Hoshizaki. Hayes stared at the inventory sheets, heart racing, as she realized that what had been buried beneath the jungle might still be active, its effects lingering decades after the war. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible hum, the jungle itself still resonating with the echoes of what had occurred. A memo from October, just weeks after the typhoon, confirmed Hayes' darkest suspicions: Ghost Reef operations terminated. All recovery assets denied clearance. Environmental contamination probable. The meaning was clear. The Marines hadn't been left behind because they couldn't be reached. They had been abandoned, their bodies contaminated, radioactive in the truest sense. Yamamoto's research in Osaka painted the same picture. Japanese intercepts reported strange radio emissions from Hoshizaki before all signals went dead. In the translations, the phrase metallic fog appeared repeatedly, hinting that both nations had witnessed the same inexplicable phenomenon. When Hayes presented her findings to the Department of Defense, the report was quietly dismissed. The files were immediately resealed under a new classification containment, long-term environmental risk. She realized what it meant. Hoshizaki wasn't simply a lost battlefield. It was the site of a failed experiment, buried not out of shame, but fear of what still lingered beneath the jungle floor. 2 years later, the island opened briefly for a joint memorial. Families of the missing Marines crossed the waters that their loved ones had once patrolled. Among them was Claire Mercer, granddaughter of Lieutenant David Mercer, holding the leather-bound journal recovered from the bunker. The salty air carried the weight of memory. As they stepped onto the island, the cicadas droned endlessly, like the hum of something alive beneath the canopy. The journal connected every clue back to the ridge, the tunnels, and the buried anomalies first detected decades ago, bridging past and present. Claire's eyes traced the edge of the dense forest, a sense of unease creeping in. Hoshizaki had not finished telling its story. The government had cleared a narrow path through the dense jungle to the excavation site, now fenced and marked with flags from both nations. Hayes and Yamamoto stood quietly, watching as families laid flowers in the soil. For a moment, the past and present seemed to merge, descendants standing where their ancestors had vanished. Artifacts from Camp Mercer, helmets, ration tins, even a rusted harmonica, were divided between museums in San Francisco and Osaka, each exhibit titled Echoes of the Forgotten. Yet among the catalogued remains, 3 DNA profiles didn't match any known Marines or Japanese soldiers. The lab's note was brief unknown male, estimated age, date of death indeterminate. Hayes kept that detail from the families. The idea that some of Mercer's men might have survived, only to die decades later, alone on Hoshizaki, was too haunting to reveal. As the ceremony concluded, she handed Claire the restored journal. "Your grandfather's words," Hayes said softly, "belong with his family now." Claire nodded, but her gaze lingered on the jungle, where the wind rippled the trees in slow, synchronized waves, like something breathing beneath the earth. She whispered, he said, "The jungle moves." Hayes stared into the green expanse and shivered. No one spoke. The memorial bells tolled, echoing across the valley, fading into the same oppressive silence that had swallowed Camp Mercer all those years ago. The rhythm of the trees mirrored the pulse recorded in Mercer's radio transmission, linking the island's present to the mysterious events of 1945. For nearly 80 years, Hoshizaki Island remained untouched, a tangled mass of green where the jungle swallowed every trace of human presence. Vines crawled over corroded steel, roots split the walls of crumbling bunkers, and relentless storms erased footprints and debris, until even the memory of Camp Mercer seemed to dissolve. Then a single drone flight changed everything. At first, the images were grainy and unclear. Slowly, details emerged, straight lines cutting through the chaos, the shadow of buried huts, a toppled tower, and the faint arc of a landing strip, hidden beneath decades of foliage. A story long buried began to rise from the earth, demanding to be seen. What started as a routine ecological survey became a reckoning with the past, a careful excavation of lives frozen in time. Photographs of the missing Marines returned to the light, their faces smiling in sepia, their names engraved in memorials across both nations. The drone footage faded into archival war images, men building, laughing, unaware that the ground beneath them would one day become legend. Today that same terrain is a forest of ferns, each leaf catching sunlight like a faint whisper of what once was. Hayes's voice carries over the scene, calm but weighted with all that's been uncovered, and all that remains a mystery. History, she says, doesn't vanish. It waits, buried beneath soil, sealed in silence, hidden in the roots of the world. She scans the island one last time as the wind rises, bending the trees in slow, hypnotic waves, echoing the motion described in Mercer's final transmission. War doesn't only take lives, she continues. It buries stories. Some lie in waiting for decades, until someone finally uncovers them. And yet, while Hoshizaki's tale chills to the bone, the story on the right-hand side is even more unbelievable, stranger, darker, and harder to imagine. The patterns revealed from above mirrored the layouts found in the tunnels and bunkers decades later, tying the drone's vision directly to the mysteries uncovered on the ground. Beneath the dense canopy, the jungle still held hidden spaces, silent but alive, waiting for the next disturbance to reveal them. As shadows lengthened over Hoshizaki, the wind stirred through the ferns, carrying a faint echo of voices long silenced, but never truly gone.